Okay, we are back for another episode of Beyond Barriers. Beyond Barriers is a conversation with leaders and community evangelists about the challenges of navigating an effective accessibility strategy. Guests get to share their journey of successes and setbacks with a primary focus on how they've overcome specific challenges that may have otherwise ended their journey. My name is Brian Gavin. I'm the co-founder of Wally, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Floris Horsman. Floris, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Great being here.
Yeah, after the build up and excitement of getting to know one another, we're finally here to have a nice conversation. So let's dive into things. I always like to start by getting to know you a little bit, giving the folks that are going to hear this episode the opportunity to learn about yourself. So, how did you get into the accessibility space and become such an evangelist and leader?
Thank you so much for those kind, lovely words and the introduction. I think I'm literally born into it. I'm born with low vision, besides some other things. And I think I just accessibility or having low vision like I have. Yeah, I guess I'm born into them together along the way with the struggles, and eventually, what I really want to do is it became first of all frustration. I want to be normal like everyone else, and I am normal, of course. But try to overcome barriers and try to influence and inspire a more inclusive and an accessible environment for all that we can all participate in, and be all our best, become our best selves. So I think how did I start it? Really frustration at first, see different challenges, and also in my first working life. After finishing university, it's quite hard. Also within university, needing extra time for exams, some specific tasks consume more time or more energy than maybe for some other people. And then at my first official intern job after university, I saw like people working with 17 different tools, and I thought, hey, that's not really accessible for anyone. And after a couple of years in my role as technical account manager, I've been asked to also start an accessibility community, like ERG Employee Resource Group, to gather and get some volunteering people together to create a more inclusive working environment for all. And then over the years, we build our team. I cannot do it alone. And I wouldn't consider myself an expert or a leader, by the way. I just want to inspire a more inclusive working environment in general, but also want to make sure we create better and more user-friendly experiences for all. Building accessibility into everything we do, and I think we can all benefit from it. It's impacting us rather sooner than later. So could all affect us at a manner as in our lives. So that's how I slowly started in this wonderful world. But I wouldn't per se call myself an expert. I try to add my part.
The passion and conviction of the first few statements, it's it's inspiring, but it's also it's grounding, right? Because you said you were born into it, right? You were born into um, this space. One of the things I wanted to talk about is the differences between being born into the space with the vision impairment versus someone who um, comes across accessibility later on in life, and the differences. From your point of view, is there a difference in how it's perceived or dealt with?
Ooh, that's a super hard question because we should ask that question to different people because we all experience the world around us in a different way, and also
Mhm.
different disabilities or experiences, our personal experiences also could develop over time. So that's super hard for me because to answer because I only know one side of the story. so to say. But I fully believe that we all are different and are unique and experience the world around us in our unique way and manner. So, very good question. I think it could be um, different for someone who is slowly affected or getting into a certain disability. I don't really like that word,
Yeah.
for the lack of a better one. English is not my first language, so if you have any better words, please let me know. More inclusive words as well. Um, so
What is your first learned language?
Dutch. So I'm also like having a disadvantage right now, since I'm not speaking my only language right now. So which does not have to do anything with my low vision, but with my situation I'm in. So I fully believe we all feel yeah, uh, for lack of a better word, like challenged,
Yeah.
one way or another.
So the challenges that you've overcome, you mentioned, there were frustrations along the journey.
Still, it's still there sometimes.
How so?
So I think I think the major boundary that I overcome is just that to accept it and also talk about it and just accept that I am who I am, and which is completely okay. And also ask for help. In the beginning, especially in my teenage years, I didn't want to be different. My dad, I have a phrase. Actually, one of my friends said it to me, reminded me that I back in the days and my eyesight was still a little bit better, and I used to bike around. However, my dad and my parents were quite concerned, especially when I was biking in the evening, and my dad bolted on a very quite like almost a number plate on the back of my bike, which was quite reflecting, and it said in Dutch, uh, low visioned, or then using an acronym, make me and my bike a little bit more visible and notify the other, yeah, people on the road being aware of me. But of course, no one else had that number plate on their bike, so of course
What
they
did it
immediately,
say in Dutch?
yeah, it's basically an S and a Z, like ziet slecht or slechtziend, depending how like. However, I'm not sure if all the other motorists or other people on the road actually knew what it meant, but it was quite a big board and it reflected, so it was gave me a lot of visibility. But of course, if I got super frustrated for some reason because I couldn't participate or I couldn't really play hockey, which was my passion back in the day, or I needed to stop playing tennis because I couldn't really see the ball anymore, then sometimes I tore my number plate apart, and the day the day after, my dad would always bolt it on again. So yeah. uh, so but
So you overcame the frustrations with
I
perseverance.
accepted it due to accept I think I overcame that I need that. And I think that I really take that to heart now. Try to use the things that work for you. For example, a magnifier or the number plate on the bike, or I don't know, speech to text software or other tools, a very big monitor. Or I used to have in my university, I used to have this plastic board that I used, for example, to put books on, to put them a little bit closer to my eyes. Otherwise, I was really like bending over like crazy to bury my head in the books. So try to not hide it, but just be open about it and use all the different tools at your advantage to make your life a little bit easier. I think that's definitely something that I overcame in the years.
And so this turned into inspiration.
Yeah.
You've advanced nicely in your career. And so you mentioned, focusing on building user UX friendly solutions, right? So how have you applied your own experiences, the acceptance and the passion to drive UX friendly solutions?
First of all, I think it starts with awareness, like making sure that people are aware how important this is. And I really believe it's not a minority we're talking about. We're talking about, like, depending on where we are in the world, like 17% of the population. And I fully believe that it could impact this, all of us at the matter. It's just a matter of time whether it's a permanent, temporary, or situational disability. So I think it starts with awareness, raising that. That's super important. Because, like, talking about innovation and putting the user at the center, I fully believe that eventually it could make the experience not only for me, for example, but also for someone else better. Um, just the other day, my mom is normally getting the car to go to a person or going to visit something. Now she needs to find her way around the airport or maybe the train station. Like, high color contrast on the on the platforms, like the signs, helps her too to easily find her way around. I really need it. For her, it's a benefit to easily find her way around. So back to my point, it started with awareness and building. Little things add up, little things that you and me can do to use high color contrast in an email or in the sign we use on the platforms on train station. It's a little things add up to eventually create a better experience. So it starts with awareness, I guess, and then slowly trying to inspire people's behavior. I think, like, accessibility also has to do with changing habits. If we are not aware, we unconsciously take the risk to exclude people from the process, and that's something we would like to avoid. So I think the process. Sorry, I'm like talking way too much, but I think it starts with awareness and trying to convince people it doesn't have to be hard. We can start with something super small, one day at a time, and little things add up, and eventually, I think, make the world a little bit more accessible.
I want to call out, we have not yet once talked about accessibility being related to compliance, right? You've spoken a lot about, I think, the educational and awareness aspect, but also the tactical and logical approach to addressing accessibility by focusing on experience, right? And that's something that I'm so passionate about as well, that you can achieve compliance through driving great experiences, but you haven't once said, oh, well, I was always worried about whether these companies and the train platforms were compliant to accessibility. It's, do they provide a good experience?
Um, can you repeat your question again? I didn't
Yeah.
fully get
No,
it.
I'm reflecting for a second that everything so far has been around having a user experience that's friendly, that's simple, that is kind of minimal viable product, if you will. I'm a
Yeah,
software guy, but it's like that approach is what's going to lead to success. Compliance may not necessarily. So less of a question, just more of a reflection of something that I'm hearing from you.
yeah.
So, okay, so your accessibility journey has been decades in the making. You probably have come across some challenges personally and professionally. So talk about when you've gone to implement and scale strategies that involve accessibility, what those have been.
Ooh, I think it starts small with building a community internally. It also depends how you look at it or what you're exactly referring to. But I think it starts, for example, in the organization trying to build a community, trying to, for example, aspire a more inclusive, more accessible working environment. You can look at it, the physical working environment, more pleasant working environment, but also more accessible digital environment. I think building awareness not only in the steering committee, working with champions, working with allies and volunteers to do little things from events that build awareness to really try to work with the organization to really make your physical office environment more user friendly for people who are using a wheelchair, for example, or making sure the stairs are more visible for a person like me that I don't fall down the stairs, like for example. But I'm now going a little bit left and right here. Your question was how can we start a conversation? How can we really build for scale in different organizations? I think raising awareness with senior leadership and making sure it's embedded into, for example, their corporate structure, mission, and vision, but also top-down approach and also bottom-up. It has to be, but also middle management has to be involved. So I think talking to different people within the organizations, get their buy-in first, and working together to that North Star. And I think that's one of the main challenges. I'm really curious how you see that as well, because you have run digital accessibility campaigns and you're part of different organizations as well, and talking to so many people across the world in different organizations.
Yeah.
How do you see that? What do you see as a main challenge or main obstacle still, or things that is holding companies back at the moment?
You touched on the awareness, so we'll kind of skip over that. For organizations that are more mature in their accessibility journey, the same pitfall that hurts organizations scaling any strategy, the siloed nature that accessibility is developing within more mature organizations. I can appreciate you need to stay in your own swim lane. If you're in the development team, you need to swim in the development team. If you're someone in marketing or HR, but we've brought a lot of folks together from a variety of different roles. And one of the questions we ask is, well, who here is an expert? And we got a lot of, well, we're an expert, which is great. No doubt about it. I mean, the amount of learning that I've taken and we've been able to share in these conversations is amazing. But when we unpacked it to, well, how does your strategy impact other parts of the organization? I think that question there wasn't a rock solid plan, because like any larger organization, you know, the siloed nature of any strategy is the biggest downfall and risk you run across. The technology advancement is also something else that, you know, I think we're on this precipice of being able to hyperscale solutions in the accessibility space. You mentioned there was, you know, 17 technologies that, you know, at one point you had to put your hands on, and putting the catalyst of technology and the lower barrier of entry into the solutioning aspect is something that I think we're still very focused from an organizational perspective on testing and solutioning at the end state of a journey, which, you know, imagine building a house and then being like painting it and be like, well, what color do you want it? It's like, well, we should have done that during the planning phase of before we painted the clapboards, not trying to talk about these things at the end of the journey and then expecting the homeowner or the carpenter and the painter to be like, oh, great, that's going to be awesome to go repaint the whole house. It's like, so those three things are, you know, probably some of the most common challenges that I hear and see within organizations.
That's so true. I see that all the time as well. Like build accessibility from the start. Like first paint your walls and then put the floors in. Otherwise, you might by accident paint over the floors and then ruin the floor. So I think by default you're getting more a smooth process, but also eventually it's easier to build it in from the start than as an afterthought, because I saw some companies, for example, try to make their applications more accessible as an afterthought because they really didn't really consider it from the start. Also, some companies work with legacy applications, of course, so that might be a little bit more challenging. But then,
Yeah, the retrofit is
yeah,
is
and
good.
then actually I wasn't part of this process, but I used some public transport applications in the Netherlands, but I used several of them to get me the full experience because obviously I'm not able to always read the sign, so it might happen once or twice, once in a while that I by accident step in the right or wrong train, especially if platforms swap and stuff like that. If I'm in a hurry to catch my train or something.
I have ended up in Brooklyn in the wrong going, the wrong direction way too many times myself because I'm in a hurry. The
Exactly, but like, now I use 5 different apps, and I think if that could have been avoided. And they all do a slightly different thing. One is helping me like reading aloud what kind of trains are departing for what at what platform. That's useful. But then the other application gives me a little bit another piece of information. So all combined, it gives me the full picture. But yeah, I think that's not really user friendly for anyone to switch between 5 different ones at the same time.
yeah,
Yeah, I fully hear what you're saying. Try to build accessibility in from the start and into the process of the organization.
yeah, and like any good strategy, the ability to be effective, it has to be organic, it has to be natural. Oftentimes the ability to test and to solution is outside of the framework of tools that the departments and the various
How do you
uh,
think that is? Sorry to interrupt you, but why do you think that is still often the case?
um, could be biased opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. But one of the biggest areas that forms a brand is the creative and design space. And having come from content supply and content management, there's such a huge lack of ability for the creative and design groups of the organization and sort of the earlier stages of the content supply to incorporate accessibility. Well, we have brand guidelines and we have brand colors, and
Yeah.
it's a really hard conversation to have with an organization, but are these accessibly compliant? Are the color ratios that you use in your ads and in your website, and content is turning over every second and is
Yeah.
personalized now? There isn't a native way to do that. And so you ask someone who's not a domain expert to do something that is outside their comfort zone. What do you do when something's outside your comfort zone often? You probably avoid it a little bit. Um, so
And
more the ability to provide native solutioning and or accessibility solutions that are incorporated into the technologies that these roles use every day. As an example, we've just released and formed a partnership with Adobe, right? Because
yeah,
the ability for the creative supply chain to be a part of the solution, they're the ones who, when you say go back and repaint the house, that doesn't go over very well.
yeah, true.
So tell me, um, one of the bigger success, what is a standout success that you've had professionally when you've had to address accessibility? You talked a lot about the community aspect, but other areas of success.
I think when we started maybe with one of the customers to do just an awareness session about accessibility, digital accessibility, the importance of it in the workplace, but eventually trying to reach out and making such an impact and trying to get hold of the right people within the organization, eventually they said, hey, but this is actually super important. Dear Floris, dear team, can you help us build accessibility in? Not only to help us develop, but also give us advice and help us with the accessibility testing of the application in this case. And we try to, together with their testing teams, we we're testing alongside them, giving them feedback, literally logging accessibility issues, grouping them together with the teams, raising them, and then afterwards, once every while, it was a project of, for example, 2 or 3 months, and then raising our concerns and having a discussion how what might be able to solve this. So, and that application wasn't really released yet. So I would say that was quite a cool project that started with an awareness session, but then talking to the right people. Apparently, we luckily were hit the right notes, and then they asked us to actually be part of our testing team. They hired us, and that was such a cool project. And we were able to present together with their testing team and their project managers to their senior leaders what we've done, the results what we've made, and also the issues we solved. And also we try to highlight also the benefits, because what you're saying is that we're in your what you just said, you're referring to the rules and regulations and guidelines, like for example the web content accessibility guidelines, but also European Accessibility Act, and also depending where you are in the world. Luckily, we have now more and more rules and regulations in place that make sure that digital experiences are more accessible. However, sometimes that's seen as a negative thing. I would like to also highlight the positive aspect of it, that we can all benefit from it. And I think it's good it's there. I think it has to be there. And so that's one of the cool projects I've been working on. Um, Also, other organizations that ask me, "Hey, Floris, can you, or dear, can you, dear team, can you help us manage accessibility, create a plan together?" And then it starts with, often it's because I work in IT, it often starts in IT, but then I think the most successful projects are not only with IT, but then we try to involve different parts of the organization, really try to involve HR, try to, if they are, or if sometimes there is a D&I manager or an accessibility manager, often there's not, but try to have the conversation with different senior leaders in that organization, if possible, because often our way in is IT. And what I see often, I'm really curious how you see that, is that IT owns it for the digital working environment, for example. But they have the conversation not only about the digital working environment, but it's more than that. How do we embed it into the organizational structure and strategy? And how can we build it in later into the product development, like you said, the applications that we build, or the maybe the organization built for their own business, or maybe also for their own customers and partners. So it's much more than IT, depending on what element of accessibility we're talking about. So I think to answer your question, the most successful projects are the ones, I think, that we start with an awareness session, and then eventually it ends up with a whole program of work, so to say, or consultancy assignment, that we for months work with different teams, not only the testing team helping development or helping testing the application, giving feedback. We're not developing ourselves, but helping from, for example, the user experience aspect to up to HR, having conversations about, uh, um, for example, the employee experience. Or I have to think about, now I'm talking now, all other projects pop up into my mind, where I was also talking about big bank, and of course they want to make sure e-bank, like we're all the big banks are getting away from going into e-banking. I think we even in the Netherlands had to do our taxes, everything, and fill it in electronically. So we want to make sure everyone is included into the process. So working together with that accessibility manager that was responsible for the customer service, with the whole building an employee journey with happy flows, having different conversations with users and employees, what kind of challenges they experience, create a feedback mechanism, so that their customers could actually give the bank feedback. Hey, this this could be a challenge. But also good and bad and ugly.
Yep.
So also share what's been going well and how can you improve, and don't stop doing this because this is really helping for me. So I think, yeah,
What I
those are.
what I love that you said is that you have clients and prospects that come to you and say, "Hey, Floris, can you help us?" Right? That step in the bridge to say, "Can you help us?" Oftentimes, especially in a leadership role, it's the most humbling request that you can make, right? And so, self compliment. You're a very um, comforting, natural, organic person that
Thank
from the
you.
minute I met you, I put my trust in you to share, my own personal experiences to open up. And so that, it helps as a person that you provide that type of vibe, but then in turn, you're also getting the trust and the respect for people to just ask for help. Um, I want to close out with where technology or the what is the sorry technology may not be the biggest disruptor, but what I want to ask is what is the biggest disruptor coming to accessibility?
Ooh, everyone is talking about AI right now, and I think AI can definitely. A lot of people have concerns, but I also see the benefits. I think it could be just so powerful in helping building better and more user-friendly experiences. Being a personal assistant, for example, during my work, doing helping me with administrative tasks, making just some things easier for me and people with different abilities. Helping with challenging tasks. I think AI is now hot and happening, and I also see the benefits of it.
So simplifying a lot of the routine work.
Yes, but also like, for example, simple things with using your own camera to experience the world around us with seeing AI, tools like that. They're not bulletproof, but they're helping with the user experience or helping with some people's tasks. And like you said, indeed, like with administrative tasks and summarizing our meeting notes, for example, or helping me sending that email, or helping me with my getting over my anxiety or focus on certain tasks, planning already meetings in my calendar for prep time for a session like this, for example. It's in the little things. I biggest disruptor right now, what's happening AI that could help
I
people
love
with.
that you brought us back to where we started. We've had an amazing conversation, but you brought us back to your passion that you explained in the beginning of the conversation, which is UX friendly solutions, right? And the technology that's advancing is only going to make that um, advance that much faster. So before we close out, Floris, I just want to ask if there's anything that we didn't get to touch on today that you want to highlight or even talk about and converse on.
Just want to give it back to people, like, don't forget how wildly like capable you are, and accessibility doesn't have to be super hard. Yes, it can be hard, but it's in the little things we do every day that can make a difference.
I couldn't have said it better. Floris, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. Your time, your journey, your professional candor, and getting people to ask you to help them is amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to our other conversations and things together. Thank you so much for your time and your invitation.
Very good.